Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you again, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And, I think the people who have harassed the world and us and everything going on, those people who promoted the fear-mongering over COVID, I think they are sensing that maybe they're losing a little bit of steam. And I do too. I think so. There's a shift in sentiment, and there's more rallies now saying enough is enough, and they're starting to resist all the nonsense. But there's still a lot of people out there, and it's there, and it's going to persist because, dealing with a cold virus is a serious thing to do. And this cold virus might even change. There may be another cold virus next year. And they haven't discovered that vaccines aren't very good for cold viruses, but they're going to pursue that. But they're also laying plans because they have to have something to stir up fear among the people, keep the people scared in order to roll over and do what the government tells them. So whether it's economics or foreign policy or whatever, or whether it's the weather changing, the people have to be frightened in order for them to say, yeah, I know it, I want to be a free person, I want to make my own decisions, but there is a limit, so there's a time when you just have to have the government take care of us. And of course, that's what they did a year and a half ago when COVID came and all the propaganda and the fear-mongering occurred. And that's been going on. But I think those who orchestrated that are realizing that their scenario is weakening. They're hard time selling this, and they're losing a little steam. But they have to have somebody and something to stir up trouble and stir up the fear among the people. And it looks like what they're going to use is climate changes and the need to have climate control. And lo and behold, it's been written by people like Bill Gates that actually mentions these kind of things. And there's people who are involved. I mean, there's trillions and trillions of dollars being invested in the markets directed, emphasizing the difference between a company that recognizes this and will obey the government, on lockdowns and whatever, and the people who resist. But it's very ingrained in business. So this is coming right now, and they've already started, excuse me, they discovered that, paying attention to tropical storms is very important. So the naming of storms has been around for a long time, but they decided a year or so ago that they should name more storms, even if it's marginal, even if it's borderline. It's a storm, it's a major storm. So guess what? There were more major storms listed last year and this year than ever before, indicating, climate changes are occurring and you better toe the line. And Bill Gates says so because it's getting bad. So this is an issue that's coming. I think it's going to be an equal aggression against us as it was against on the issue of COVID. But maybe if those who learned the lesson over COVID might wake up, but unfortunately, the people who use the environment as a weapon are a long way off from how markets and freedom and free enterprise and property rights solves the problems of potential pandemics. In the same way with weather problems and with environmental problems, it isn't that they can't be taken care of, it's just that the government can't do it. And government is a culprit. They've created some of these problems. I mean, pollution and everything else, and yet people just have been conditioned to go to the government. The government's going to take care of them. We have a problem, send me money. And it works for a while, and people then get addicted, and they say, well, I don't have enough, so keep taking care of me. So it's a real challenge, and I think that right now we have a real challenge to us to help people understand what's going on. But there certainly is a shift in attitude. But the principle of having somebody to fear, to stir up fear among the people, so that the people say, I need the government to take care of us. I think that still exists. Chris?
Yes, Dr. Paul, and Americans should be prepared for an onslaught of climate propaganda We're already used to it by now. But you know, I've read many times that the largest polluter on the planet is the US government via the military. And you know, a lot of people get hung up on this. No, it's China or it's XYZ or somebody else. That's not the point. Point is the US government is amongst the biggest polluters in all the world. And yet it is us, the individual people, who have to stop using plastic bags, use paper straws that fall apart in your drink. You have to root through your trash and separate it into nice little piles of garbage. You can't have kids. You have to eat fake meat. You can't drive. All this stuff is on us, even though they're the ones that are the biggest polluters. So they pollute, and we're supposed to be micromanaged. So anybody who's thinking through this, like COVID, will realize this is all about control. And they have no intention of not being the biggest polluters. There's no intention of shutting down the empire and bringing all the troops home. It's almost impossible to get anybody to come home. So what needs to happen is people realize this in their minds and think, you know, if you're the biggest polluters, you go fix your problems that you're causing and leave us alone. We're not meant to be micromanaged. We're free people. And for any reason whatsoever, whether it's real or imaginary, nobody is supposed to micromanage our lives.
Very good. And you know, the tool that they used in frightening people over COVID has been the distortion and outright lying about the stats. Saying that, you know, when it first started, millions of people are going to die, and we can prove it by statistics and what's happening here. Well, that didn't pan out because they were gross distortion. Some people say, well, they just made a miscalculation, and others say, no, they did it on purpose just to terrorize, the people. And they've already started doing some of that already. You know, there's a They do it, you know, with the number of storms that are coming and supposedly what has to be done. But people are at a point where they're looking for to be taken care of. Now, the one thing is that during COVID, we had this lockdown and we had this whole issue of Wokism, and which means and brings together corporations to do the dirty work for the government. And all of a sudden we have the executives of the biggest corporations enforcing the lockdown rules that the government put in. And that has caused some confusion, but they're in bed together. And this has happened already to a large degree within this environmental activity that's going on, because, you know, over the years now they've had investments made directed at obeying the government's rules on the environment, and it's a group called the ESG group, which means that they come together because of the dealing with they're protecting the environment. They'll do it for social things, social reasons, and be observant of, you know, progressivism, and also that they would be dealing with the whole issue not of government, the way we talk about government messing things up, but governance, that they will be part of the government to govern the people. And currently, that number of investments made based on the companies that capitulate and promise they will obey the government, no matter what they tell them to do, is over. The investments have been over $17 trillion. And one company by Larry Fink, you know, his company, his holding company has, $8 trillion. And they have a lot of power. They cooperate with the Federal Reserve. And anybody who disobeys, they can punish them. They can deny credit to them. They can bail out the good guys, and on and on. And that is going on more so than ever, which means that they're taken care of. But that's all a front. That's all a front to neutralize the people, because that brings people over and say, that is responsible corporations, and they're protecting the environment. The whole thing is they're basing it on the assumption, and Chris has already pointed out, you better not depend on the government. They're the biggest polluters we have. So they could do that, and yet at the same time they will depend. They will not depend on a free market approach, because there's no reason in the world to think that authoritarians in a big government setting, verging on Marxism and socialism will take better care of property and the environment than will property ownership. Property ownership and responsibility and liability. Take, for instance, right now of the problems they're running into with the vaccines. Well, the companies get exempt, from any liability of the vaccines. No wonder there's problems and will be problems. So this exemption that they get is a big deal. The profits they make is a big deal. So it's the combination of big corporations and government that creates these problems, and that's what's going on now. And they're preparing for this. But there will be more and more stories of how great the danger is about this climate change. Climates do change, and weather does change, and it's going to continue, but there's going to be a gross distortion of the dangers that are coming, and because they're messing up the economy, and they might say, well, just look at the people suffering from the bad weather. They don't even have a house. Well, people don't have houses now because of the lockdowns and all the nonsense and what the Federal Reserve does, where people do. The middle class gets wiped out, but they're going to blame it on climate changes, and we have to deal with that. So it's just another invitation to massively expand the government's role in our lives and in the business of everybody in this country. I see it as a continuation of the nonsense of a year and a half ago, and they are changing directions because I think we have made inroads to the scheme that they have been working with COVID. But it's still around, but I think they're weakening it, and that's why they're going to shift their attention to the climate. And we know how efficient the government ought to be in changing the climate.
You're right, Dr. Paul. Yes, I agree. And as we've pointed out on our show, you and Daniel so well, the COVID narrative is unsustainable. It can't be sustained long term. We're already seeing college football, 100,000 people in a stadium. There's no mad rush to go get these vaccines for the people that don't want them, regardless of these mandates. People are avoiding them. They're vaccinated or in the hospital being sick and dying of COVID. So the narrative has failed. Now, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything's going to turn back to reality. The Soviet Union was finished a long time before it was actually finished. So just because the narrative has failed doesn't mean, as Dr. Paul is pointing out, that they won't switch the tyranny onto something else. Because when a bully has you down, he's not going to just let you up. He's going to give you another kick to the stomach. And that's what they would love to do if they could get away with it. So it's prudent for us to at least expect them to try to pull this into climate tyranny. And, they probably believe that they can keep climate tyranny going even longer, because there will never be a time that the climate is not changing. There will never be a time, where they'll say, okay, that's it. The climate is good. We won. We did it. Now you can have all your freedom back. That will never, ever happen. They would love for something, if they could clamp down on this climate, to keep it, to make it be permanent. Now, fortunately, they have been lying for years now, and people are sick of it and don't believe a word that they have to say. So that works in the favor of this not coming to pass. So it is not inevitable that we switch from COVID tyranny to climate tyranny.
Very good. And they're going to continue with their argument that is falling flat, more so now than before, and that is follow the science. Well, it's getting to be a joke, on what they do. The science says if a person is capable outside the establishment to buy medicine that is very cheap and it works better than all the vaccines that have been passed out, ban those. That's what we have to do. And then if they have something that has been not fully tested, that has been brought about because they've had by the drug companies, because they didn't have a liability responsibility, and enforce those upon the people and punish people who won't take the vaccines because they're getting skeptical. And even just yesterday, it was that there was a report that they set up for the CDC, and there was they set up an advisory panel within the CDC, and the advisory panel came back and had an agreement that sort of more of a limitation on how much vaccines would be forced on people. It wasn't a really, really major decision, just allowing, not preventing some unnecessary vaccination. So the director, Walensky, said, no way, I'm overruling it. So they set these things up and they do it. And then they say, Walensky then becomes the champion of science. And then if she has a question, she'll go back to her buddy Fauci. And they will decide what science says. So it's a farce is what it is. And it's telling lies. It's an untruth. And believe me, it fails. All this stuff, it's sort of... I always go back to economics because there's so many untruths about that. When they say deficits don't matter, printing money doesn't matter, interest rates don't exist anymore and it doesn't matter, and there's no danger in this. It just goes on and on. But it's based on lying and misinformation. And I always want to give them a pass to a degree and say maybe it's just bad economic policy. Maybe they went to the wrong university. But I know some of that's true. But basically, we also know and understand who's really pulling the strings. And it has a lot to do with the large corporations that get together and they participate in the cultural Marxism, enforces the laws that the government can't even defend. So they say, oh, we're not forcing you to take a vaccine, take a shot, but they get their companies to put those rules in, or they will be denied access to the financial markets, or they will be punished. And so the one thing is, this is a terrible way to look at it, is what they're doing and all that money, the $17 trillion that's directed mainly for these social reasons. And the one thing is that type of decision making is part of an extension of the malinvestment that occurs when the Fed lowers interest rates to zero and print a lot of money. There's a lot of malinvestment done. So when you make investments up to this huge amount of money based on their interpretation of what's best socially and what cultural Marxism is all about, believe me, there's a lot of malinvestment and debt that can't be controlled just with the Fed doing what it's doing. But the further this is already on its way, this environmental stuff associated with the climate control. So that's going to continue. But my argument being that there will be a correction, and they have those companies. It's been shown that if you join that gang of people, that you will obey the government. In that $17 trillion. There's statistics that show that they're doing pretty well, with their profits. But my suggestion and my perception is that when push comes to shove and the market acts, and eventually the market rules out. When the market acts, they will be one of the most vulnerable group of people because they made their decisions wrong because they have listened to the low interest rates, that signal from the Fed and all the easy credit, and also because they join in this social manipulation and this control for the sake of climate control.
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will finish up by saying, even if climate change were a real problem that they say it is, and again, judging by government's actions, they're the biggest polluters on the planet, so they must not really think it is what they say it is. Otherwise, their actions would be a lot different. But even if it was a huge problem, the last people on Earth that you would ever want to try to fix it is the government. I mean, look what they just did with COVID, a virus. They had no business getting involved, but they jumped in. And they not only didn't fix anything, there's still COVID, they added a whole mountain of other problems on top of it. So we have the original problem plus all these new problems on top of it. So that's what government intervention really does. So again, if climate change is a problem, you'd want to keep government as far away from it as possible because they would only make it worse. Now, with that being said, we do have reason for long-term optimism because all of this must fail. Unfortunately, in the process of them failing, they create enormous damage. They have already done so. If you look back at history of just the 1900s, that whole century, with all the schemes of socialism and fascism and communism, they all failed without exception. They're all gone. But look at the damage they created in trying to create what is uncreatable. So once again, humanity is going to have to rebuild the destruction in the future. We hope that rebuilding process will be built on the ideas of liberty.
Very, very good, Chris. You know, a company that has been brought to my attention in the last year, but it's been around a long time, or a lot longer than last year, that is the company of BlackRock, and they're big, and they're more in the news recently. And Larry Fink runs this, but he's controlling this $8.7 trillion. So it's big, and he works with the Fed. He cooperates with the Fed. If he needs to buy and sell and regulate interest rates, he's there to help out. So he's very much involved in that, and he also just recently was in the news. So I read what I read anytime I see his name. I read it about BlackRock and Larry Fink. And last week or so, a week or two ago, gold took a pretty strong dip. And of course, you can, on the surface, make a lot of arguments about, you know, all the reasons with all the printing of money and what's going on. Gold, you know, theoretically, somebody could make the case gold should be much higher. But gold is where it is because of all the interference that goes on. Governments are interested in the price of gold. They were interested in gold enough to keep it at $35 an ounce from 1933 all the way up to 1971. So they fixed the price of gold there. It was artificial. When it collapsed in 1971, it soared up to over $800. So it's something that they can suppress, but eventually the market rules. So I was just wondering that week that gold dropped, it said that Fink sold essentially all the gold that he was holding in his fund, which would be probably significant and would cause the price to go down. But that doesn't mean that, for me, I don't react because I think gold is money, and I think it's the ultimate money. But I think, and just from my experience talking with the Federal Reserve Board chairmen, they're very interested in what the ratio is, the gold price in dollars, because that is a reflection, I think the most important number of the reflection of how they're doing in money and manipulating things. They want to manipulate, they want to spend, they want to inflate, they want to rig all this, but if they could just keep that signal, you know, within reason. So if tomorrow or the next day, let's say gold doubled, boy, I'll tell you what, there would be some panic there. And then they'd have to come up with another idea of what to do or put taxing on gold or whatever. But they do care about it, but ultimately, it's not going to hold. This whole big bubble that these people who want to take care of the world climate, and think that they can do that by rigging all these things, that's going to come to an end. And because it's fragile, it's artificial, and it isn't a reflection of the marketplace. The market is not perfect, but it's much, much better than a bunch of bureaucrats at the CDC telling us what we should do or trying to regulate medical care. I mean, they're total failures at this. So this is a reflection of what's going on today. So it's fragile, and there has to be a correction. I just can't understand why we can't do a better job on getting people to support the principles of freedom, private property ownership, voluntarism, property rights, civil liberties for everybody, no lying, cheating, or stealing. Get the government very, very small, honesty and money, and a different foreign policy where we don't have an empire. We don't want to police the world. We're not able to police the world. We're not able to run the medical care system. And there's so many things that can be done privately, and as I said, imperfectly, but compared to authoritarian government, if you want to know what happens there, all we have to look at is all the examples of the 20th century. I was hoping that most of that stuff would stop after we got to the 21st century, but they've just shifted gears. No, we haven't had World War III yet, or World War II or I, all the terrible things that happened in the last century, but there's still a lot of mischief going on, and there's a lot of distortion, rejection of the principles of personal liberty. And that is why we work so hard here at the Liberty Report to promote the report and promote the principles of private property ownership, and why we think that if you're for liberty and peace and prosperity, you will support these principles and the principles of personal liberties and not collectivism. want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.